All right, very good. Thank you, everyone. Happy Friday and welcome to the regional building. My name is Bob Crum. I'm the executive director here at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission and the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization. And on behalf of our commission and our elected and appointed leaders, I want to thank everybody for attending and participating today in our regional housing assessment work group meeting. You'll get a little more background on this effort, but obviously in our region, we are all seeing the challenges that housing is presenting all spectrums of our community, of our region. And what we're going to be sharing with you today is the work of our Hampton Roads Planning District Commission Housing Work Group. Give you a little bit of background with our housing professionals here and specialists on what the landscape looks like a bit, who's working on various initiatives and a proposal that we have to try to move forward collectively as a region. So I know many of you here, we have had personal and professional conversations about the importance and challenge of housing, and it's just very much appreciated everybody being at the table today. Before we go on to some formalities, and I'll ask a couple people to make a couple of comments for introductions. But first off, I think it'd be helpful to maybe just to go around the table, and I think everybody will be impressed at the breadth of community stakeholders that are with us today. So, Mayor Dyer, why don't we start to the left? Just a quick introduction, and we'll get it going around the table.
Hey, Bobby D., Mayor of Virginia Beach.
And my bad, my apologies. So when you go around, I should have said this. So please use your mic. And Rob will let me know if we making certain we're audible. But when you press it, when you're red, you're live. So red means live. So thank you so much, Deidre.
Deidre Garrett, Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, Housing Program Specialist.
Vaughn Pauler, James City County Neighborhood Development.
Reagan Groller, Coastal Virginia Builders Association.
Lysandra Shaw, Newport News Housing Authority, Deputy Director.
Georgette Houchins, Virginia Housing.
Linda Rice, Hampton Roads Community Foundation.
Hannah Worley, Creator Planning District Commission, just listening in.
Scott.
Charvela West, United Way, Virginia Peninsula.
Beth Lewis, Southampton County Community Development.
Good morning, Andy Stevenson, Senior Director, Government and Community Relations, Centera Health.
Sherry Norquist, Executive Director, Community Engagement and Impact with Centera.
Jim Wofford, MacArthur Center with the HRTPO.
Good morning, I'm Chris McNamara with Virginia Housing.
Good morning, Brian Cozy with the Virginia Housing Alliance.
Steve Lawson with the Lawson Companies here in Norfolk.
Hey, good morning, Eric Wahlberg, Principal for Planning and Economics with the PDC.
Tim Cross, Deputy Director of Planning and Development Services, York County.
Abbott Woodall, York County Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization.
Jay Grant, LISC, Hampton Roads.
Mark Mattel, City of Norfolk, St. Paul's Transformation Project.
Jonathan McBride, Hampton Community Development Office.
Hi, I'm John Konak with the Chesapeake Housing Authority.
Bill Young from 4Kids and the Regional Housing Crisis Hotline.
Boris Wade, Surrey County Director of Planning and Community Development.
Good morning, Sarah Jane Kirkland, Associate Vice President for Corporate Partnerships at Old Dominion University. Hi, good morning. Rick Dwyer, Executive Director, Hampton Roads Military and Federal Facilities Alliance.
Drew Lumpkin, Regional Director, United States Senator Mark Warner's office.
I'm Doug Smith with the Hampton Roads Alliance. We're the regional economic development organization supporting the 14 of the cities and counties here.
Good morning. I'm Delegate Sia Price. I represent the 95th District, mostly Newport News and a small part of Hampton.
Welcome, everyone. Greg Grotendorf, Deputy Executive here at the PDC.
Todd Nichols, Deputy Director of Harumpa.
Brian Solis, good morning. I'm a Deputy City Manager with Chesapeake.
Good morning, Steve Brown, City Council, Hampton.
Andrea McClellan, City Council, City of Norfolk, as well as Hampton Roads Transportation Commissioner.
Thank you, everybody. I I think just the attendance from a broad array of representatives of our community really captures the challenge before us and possibly the opportunity before us if we can come together as a region. In a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to our staff team, Deidre and Greg, and let them walk you through some background information. But I've asked three people to just give some very, very brief comments just from their perspective of housing and what some of their general observations are. Ms. McClellan, would you mind starting, and then I'll go on to Mayor Dyer, and then Delegate Price. I'd like to hear some of your thoughts as well as we begin this conversation.
Thanks, Bob. So good morning, everybody. This is a really impressive group. Delegate, thank you very much for being here. Honored to have you in our presence. I think it's really important that we are all here from a regional perspective because we cannot tackle this by each city or by each county. One of the many stats that Greg has imparted upon us over the years was that this region is the top 3 in the country of people who live in one city and work in another. So we definitely cannot tackle this alone, and we've got to be tackling this regionally. So I'm really glad that we're here thinking about this together. This is obviously a big issue from an economic development perspective, so I appreciate many of the employers and the Alliance for being here as well, because in order to attract and retain our employees, we've got to have good, affordable, safe, quality housing for all. I also want to talk about specifically transit. I am on the board of HRT, and that's a very big component as well as we're thinking about housing. It can't just be about the physical housing stock. It's also got to be about how we are moving our folks in and around our region as well. So I thank you, Bob, and the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission for convening us on a regional basis as you do so well, so frequently. And I'm excited for the conversation today and hope you all will join me in supporting a regional initiative to take a deeper dive into the issue of affordable housing here in Hampton Roads.
Thank you. Mayor Dyer?
Thank you, and good morning and welcome to everybody. First of all, I'm delighted to see that we needed a larger room, to conduct this business. Once again, I think this is one of the top priorities that we have. So if it's okay, I'm just going to give you an overview, and then we're going to get down to a specific that occurred recently in Virginia Beach that you may have read about in the front page yesterday. The need for housing is not unique to Virginia Beach. It's not unique to Hampton Roads. It's a problem every municipality is confronting. And the point is, we just had a grand opening or a groundbreaking for Amazon coming to Virginia Beach, 1,000 jobs. That's great. Where are the folks going to live? Where are they going to be able to live in affordable housing? And, I am also involved with folks from Harumpha. And let me just say that the military has a crying need in this region for affordable housing for the military, for operational readiness to conduct their business. And, along with childcare and everything, the problems that Bob Crum and, the district commission are confronting are not unique to our region. And then recently at our council retreat, we established affordable housing as our 4th priority behind stormwater, public safety, schools. It's housing, and we set that as a criteria. And so we brought forward an application recently, for consideration to put, some good workforce housing where 30% of the housing stock would be affordable. It's in an area near a military installation, but once again, we had a meeting, Rick and I had a meeting yesterday with the Admiral that's over things. He said, boy, this is really good. We need it. It's in proximity to Oceana and proximity to Dam Neck. It works out well. It's dense. But once again, the pushback that we're getting, even from the district council person, the thing that we're going to confront, and I mentioned, and it was mentioned in the paper yesterday, yes, this is going to set a precedent, but it's going to be a precedent that's going to be in every one of our districts in Virginia Beach. So once again, as we talk about these things, once again, we're going to have to overcome some barriers to success, but they can be done. There's no doubt in question or reservation. We have 2 developers in our region, and one of them's there, Steve Lawson, who has demonstrated that we can make it work. and Taylor Franklin, who has literally, I think he did over 5,000 affordable units throughout the Commonwealth. But once again, we're going to come up with solutions, but the idea is, to engage the public, let them know what we're doing and why. Reduce the stigmas that come along with, whether it be vouchers or workforce housing or everything, and just let people know about the priority of what we need. We cannot, as a region, be an economic engine without affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Delegate Price?
Yes, good morning. I'm really glad to be here. For 6 of the 8 years that I've been in the legislature, I've been on general laws, which handles a lot of the housing legislation that comes through. And, I think it is beautiful to have a large room full of all of you wonderful people. And I think it's the silver lining of the crisis that now that it's hit everyone, we can all talk about it. And now that it's hit everyone, it's not just up to 1 or 2 cities to try and deliver on the solutions. And so as I see one of my favorite council people from Newport News, I'm really encouraged to know that there are regional solutions that are being discussed. The face of being unhoused is changing. And I think as we realize that, we have to have those immediate needs met while we're looking at the longer term solutions. So I'm excited for this conversation to see what we can do at the state level to help empower localities to do the zoning changes that are needed, the tax incentives, whatever is needed so that we can address this issue. I do believe that housing is a human right, and we are having a human rights crisis right now. So I really look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. So let's move on. I'm going to step aside now and really let our staff specialists take you forward. We're going to start with Deidre Garrett, who's going to kick off with a little PowerPoint overview to give you some background on our housing work group. Greg Grutendorst will follow Deidre. And then the most important part happens. We want to hear from you to make certain you believe that we're on the right path and strategy moving forward. Before we do that, and this is an interesting exchange of responsibilities, right? So most meetings I'm sitting here saying, Madam Chair, we got to call for public comment. So this is great that I get, thank you so much. Can we call for any public comments to address our housing work group? Seeing none, there is one more thing that I've been tardy on. I know we have Susan Gaston who's joined us virtually. Susan, would you mind coming in and introduce yourself, please? Okay, we'll keep working on that, but I know Susan Gaston was going to try to come in and join us virtually. So, Deidre, why don't I turn it over to you, and you can start us off today.
Yes. Well, thank you again, everyone, and good morning. So how did we get here, right? I want to say early last year at the PDC board meeting, council men and women brought up housing in a regional way, just wanting to address some of the issues and looking at it from a regional standpoint. So internally with the PDC, we began to talk. In August of 2022, we presented with the Community Advisory Committee, and that's kind of where we coined the term housing for all, because housing means something different to everyone in this room, right? But we know, we use Wallops Island for example. We want those engineers to be able to find adequate housing, but we also need the janitor who works at Wallops Island to find adequate housing, right? In 22 October, we then presented to the board and got the approval to begin this work group. We had our kickoff meeting in January of 2023 at Heron's Landing, and that was strategically done so that we could see what a regional effort really looks like. Heron's Landing is permanent supportive housing here in the city of Chesapeake, but it took Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Suffolk to come together and make that a reality for our single formerly homeless people. After that, we had a meeting with the Regional Transportation Advisory Panel, which came down after the 2020 General Assembly. And this is comprised of your major businesses, your military installations, your people in the community, higher education, and in making decisions in transportation for the region. And we know that that intersection, as Andrea stated, of housing and transportation is super important. So we wanted to make sure that we spoke with them as well. Our next meeting was very awesome with Seaside Harbor. Again, Mr. Lawson with the Lawson Group. He really showed us what a regional, affordable community could look like. He has some market rate units, but as well as some affordable units. So it's very possible, and that's there in Virginia Beach. Um, July of 2023, we met back here with just the work group to just have a discussion on the scope and next steps. And then in August, we knew, we have people on the ground every day doing this and making the decisions and planning and zoning. So we knew we needed to meet with them as well. And so we had that meeting in August of 2023. So then that leads us to you guys today. We want to make sure that all of the key players and stakeholders in our region convene and have this discussion and create a clear path moving forward to this assessment that we need so much. To just have an a la carte tool for each of the localities to use when looking at and addressing affordable housing or housing for all needs. All right, Cindy, next slide. Greg?
So Deidre just talked about 7 previous meetings we had. One of the questions we've asked at each meeting is, what is the most pressing issue in housing? And Deidre and Shernita presented this question to the Hampton Roads Housing Consortium as well, which is the group of leading professionals in the region that discuss housing topics. Now, I'm not going to take you through this process once again, but I assure you, if we ask what the most pressing issue is in housing right now, there's about 50 people in this room, we're going to get 50 different answers, right? And so when somebody says we want to address the housing crisis, what is the housing crisis? There's many crises, right? There's many things going on. And that's really the point of this slide. When you look at housing, it's an incredibly complex issue. It's intertwined all over the place. Deidre will talk a little bit about that more, but these are just some of the examples of what's come up as what is the most pressing issue in housing. And depending on where you sit, the most pressing issue is going to be very different. But the reality is there's pressing issues confronting us from all different sides and all different aspects. So if you go to the next slide, we spoke a little bit about the regional and sub-regional issues that we're hearing about most recently, issues that we've been trying to confront. And for some, just to give you an example of the complexity of some of these issues, I'll just talk about evictions for a second, right? Several years ago, a report was released that showed that Hampton Roads has so many evictions happening in this region, and it's one of the highest in the nation. So people got together and they wanted to act really quick, and they said, we need to stop evictions in Hampton Roads. We need to prevent this from happening. Evictions are awful. Evictions are terribly destructive to the homes that are affected by evictions. But if you stop evictions, you create another affordable housing problem. Because if you stop evictions, you'll no longer have landlords that are really willing to rent out, and you'll lose a large chunk of affordable housing. So when you tug on one string, you move something else, and you tug on another string, you move something else. And this is how complex the issue is. So when people come in and say, we want to solve the issue of evictions and prevent them from happening, you're going to have unintended consequences that might be worse than the horrible issue that evictions is. And this goes down the list of housing and sub-regional housing issues that we have in front of us. So this is really kind of the crux of when the Housing Consortium meets, and they'll meet here and they talk about these issues. We really want people to start to understand how complex and how connected this issue is. And that's really why we're bringing you all here today, because we want to work towards a solution. But working towards a solution means you have to really understand the problem. Go to the next slide.
So as Greg stated, that intersection of housing, as you all know, there are so many intersections: health, transportation, culture, economic deployment. Development, employment, poverty and wealth, quality of life, education, safety, well-being. We found that it interrupts people's sense of community, um, even with some of the affordable housing initiatives that we've already had, like Heron's Landing. It's here in Chesapeake, and then we have uh, people in Virginia Beach that need to be housed, but they don't want to come to Chesapeake because they may lose their sense of community, right? And all of their people are still back in Virginia Beach. So, and this is why it's so important to have that transportation, as Ms. McClellan stated, so that they can move around. And so these are the intersections, and we know that it's so complex, as Greg stated, that we really need to address and find out what we have first. We need to know what's in the region. We need to make sure that we have an accurate list of what we have in our region so that we can give these resources to our constituents. Next slide, Cindy.
So why are we here, and why do we have you all in this room? One of the things that we recognize, right, it's really, really difficult to do this regionally. And when you look around the nation, we've looked at examples, what are others doing? And it doesn't really matter what others are doing because nobody looks like us. That's a tough thing to get across. Like, can we copy what somebody's doing in San Diego, Seattle, Chicago, Indianapolis, you name it? We don't look like other metropolitan areas. As Ms. McClellan stated at the beginning, right, so many of our community leave their jurisdiction of residence in the morning, they go somewhere else. We're crossing locality lines. We got 17 jurisdictions, and our labor shed goes to North Carolina, is on the eastern shore. Our labor sheds are varied. You've heard of this region described as multi-nucleic. We don't look like anybody else. There's no template for us to pick up. Right? And then if you layer on that, we have, there's federal housing programs, and there's a federal housing plan, and there's HUD that works at the state level, right? DHCD, Virginia Housing, there's a lot going on at the state level to figure out what they're doing. And each locality looks at that through the comprehensive planning process. Eric Wahlberg over there convenes the regional planning directors. They talk about housing related issues frequently. Localities are doing their plan. Then we have our military folks here as well. Military is certainly concerned about this. Economic development, Doug Smith, Sean Avery, right, looking at it from their angle. But what we're looking at, when we say community partners, we need to look at this regionally in a way that's never been done. And so, Shanita Bethay, unfortunately, she couldn't be with us here today, but she's one of the most knowledgeable people related to housing in Hampton Roads. And she'll tell you, there is nobody in Hampton Roads that knows what's going on. There's nobody in Hampton Roads that can tell you exactly who's doing what is where, what services are provided, who they're available to, what crosses the state, the feds, locality jurisdictions, what nonprofits have available, what services are needed. And if you take an issue as complex as housing, where the most pressing issue is constantly moving and constantly changing, and is tied to all this other intersections that Dieter just spoke about, if you take an issue as complex of that and recognize that regionally, we look at housing regionally, right? Most people probably moved here from somewhere else, right? When you came here, you weren't thinking, I want to live in Chesapeake, I need to live in Poquoson, James City County is going to be you come here and you're like, okay, it's probably where I'm going to work. How far is that going to be from whatever housing I want to look at? We look at this in a regional capacity, and we have no idea what's going on. We have no idea what services are offered. We have no idea how they overlap. We don't know where the gaps are. We don't know where the service gaps are. And we have a lot of really good people working hard to deliver, to fix the issues that are in front of us without a good understanding of what's all being done. And so the press really from our board all those months back is, can we look at this in a regional perspective? And yes, we can, but we first need to understand it. We don't understand it. and to understand it is not easy. Dr. Agarwal and I have been involved in economics a long time. You know, we can put together the data, we can put together more data, but we're not going to get on top of this unless you really, really start to peel back all the layers of the onion, understand what's federal, understand what's state, understand what's local, how this stuff is all brought together, and who's doing what, where, and when. Then look at the needs as well. So that's really where the community partners come in. We have plans federally, we have plans at the Commonwealth, we have locality plans. We don't have a regional housing plan, and we're not going to develop a regional housing plan today. What we're simply trying to do is, can we even understand where we are at a regional level? And that's where the word assessment comes in. We want to get to an assessment. But really, to Bob's point, we really want to hear from you. So I'll go back to Deidre at the next slide, and we could talk a little bit about the components.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to piggyback on what Greg said, so in this assessment, these are the things that we want um, as the components. Of course, an analysis of the current policies, strategies, and conditions. What do we have here in Hampton Roads already? Who is already doing this? And how do we assist them and help them and push that forward? A housing demand analysis, a gap analysis of our current programs and services. And then again, I talked about that a la carte best practices toolkit. We know that this region is unique, and each locality does not look like the next one. So what may work for Newport News may not work for York County. And so we want to make sure that we have an a la carte toolkit that you guys can go to for best practices. And then, of course, housing strategies that incorporate transportation and economic development, because as we've stated so much, that intersection for both of those is extremely important. Next slide, Cindy. So Greg wants to pose a question. We all want to pose a question. Bob?
Yes, so what we thought we would do is frame the roundtable discussion and lead with the first question for you. So all of you are coming at this issue from different perspectives from where you sit, based on your expertise, based on your critical role in the community. So what we'd like to ask of you is, when you think of housing in a regional context, what type of information could a regional housing assessment collect that would assist you with your efforts? We're going to be doing this work at a regional level. There are going to be local solutions. There are going to be solutions that are going to involve a whole lot of collaboration from different components of our community. How can we best help you by doing a regional housing assessment, and what type of information would most help you with your efforts? Now, Susan Gaston, I know, I apologize, we're having a little technology glitch here, but let me see. I know Susan texted me, and I know she had a comment. Susan, are you able to come on in with us? No, so we'll get Susan's comments after the meeting. I apologize for that, but what I'd like to do is open up the table for conversation, and what input would you have related to what type of information from where you sit we need to think about collecting in our regional housing assessment?
Can I ask a question first?
Sure.
What does multinucleic mean? we all do it.
So many metropolitan areas, you think like New York, Chicago, Indianapolis, there's a center. That's the nucleus, and everybody goes to the center from the outside. Hampton Roads is unique because our labor sheds are spread around the region. We don't have one locality or one center where everybody comes in. We have multiple centers that are spread throughout the 17 jurisdictions. There's multiple nuclei. So that's the idea of multinucleic. We don't have that one. Makes it really easy for transit to work in a multinucleic environment, but that's where we are.
So, Drew, I know this is a difficult time, but that's a word you could try during those negotiations. All right, so I could call on a couple of you, but I know there's some perspectives. What thoughts, comments might you all have? Anybody want to go first? All right. Yes, Mr. Lawson, please.
I'll take a stab at it, and this is an impressive group first and foremost, and I appreciate everybody's time because this is an issue that's been a long time coming, and fundamentally, and some people in the room have heard my presentation at Seaside Harbor, this is about supply. Quite frankly, for decades, we have structurally limited the supply of housing, and we've done that primarily with a well-intentioned focus on large lot single-family development. And we've done that in the face of wildly increasing demand. We all love to blame the millennials, so let's just keep on going. But in reality, what they've done is they've had the unmitigated gall to grow up and age into their household formation years. So we've got this huge amount of demand in a system that just isn't equipped to deliver it. So that's what I think is at the root of this issue is supply. And an assessment would need to gather how much supply do we have currently? How much land is currently zoned that can be built on today with the type of product that the market currently wants, i.e. our young people? And I think if you look at that, you would find that almost no land in Hampton Roads is immediately available for development. And those are numbers that I think we have that we need to get our arms around. We need to track, and then we need to change, I think, the paradigm of how we think about development. Instead of every municipality being the gatekeeper, making sure we don't have enough development. We need to change that paradigm, I think, to consider the responsibility that every municipality has to allow enough housing to be created to avoid precisely the crisis we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent comments. So I'm going to look to my right a second. Doug Smith from the Alliance, Sean Avery from the Workforce Council. But Doug, we're talking all the time, right? We're in a competition for workforce, right? And as you're going out and you're trying to attract employment to our area, housing, I know, is becoming more and more of a challenge. Would you mind giving your perspective? Doug, if you wouldn't mind hitting your mic there, sir.
I think he's making an excellent point. But the other side of that is who's going to deliver the solution, right? It's going to be Rob. It's going to be S.L. Nussbaum. It's going to, the mayor talked about Franklin Johnston. It's going to be Breeden. It's going to be, you got to get those folks in a room, frankly. And we can like developers, not like developers, all that. The reality is they deliver these solutions. They're living in a rising or a relatively high rate environment, rising costs. So you've got a little bit of a whammy of, if you want these things to happen, candidly, find the sites, then you're going to have to subsidize them. You just are. So you ought to get these guys in a room, get guys like Tim Faulkner and Miles Leon and Rob and others in a room to just, because I think we can dance all around it, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to take the risk of developing this stuff. Somebody's got to borrow money. Somebody's got to provide equity. And if you don't create that playing field that works for them, then you can do all the studies and gather all the data you want. Nobody's going to build it, right? So that'd be sort of my piece. Frankly, you said the other piece. The reality is everybody in the country wants to have a house that is affordable, safe, near a good school system, and not very far from an airport, right? The whole country is trying to figure that out right now. But and so the regions that do figure this out are going to win. So, I mean, I think what you're doing makes a ton of sense. But you got to get, so in terms of what do you gather, you got to get a room full of developers in to tell you what it's going to take for them to deliver these products.
Yeah, and great point, Doug. And just to be very direct about this, we see the private sector as integral in this. this. Mr. Lawson, thank you. He hosted our group at one of our beginning meetings down at his development and talked with us about, you know, open the door and open the books a bit and walk through some of those things. Deidre, Heron's Landing, we visited already, but we're going to have to do this with the private sector. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of developers that deliver really good product in the right circumstances. So they're out there.
Other comments? Yes, sir, please.
So playing off on the idea of a subsidy, I wonder what would the public sector get for that subsidy? Because I'm assuming it might be the public sector who would play a part in providing that subsidy. We have Virginia Housing here with us, and of course they play an integral role across the Commonwealth. So, and I think we also have to think about what are the knock-on effects, because I agree with what Steve said, he's spot on. But then when we talk about what does that do to our transportation, because we're also a collection of peninsulas, and so we're very constrained that way. So then we've got to be thinking about how do we move those people around.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. I'd love for, and I'm sorry, I keep Rob's your brother, it's Steve.
Rob is my brother. It's Steve, but thanks.
You ought to talk about the LIHTC program a little bit. There is a very, very attractive program that makes some of these projects work. It's just a really small, very competitive pot that, you know, if you could figure out a way to make that pot bigger, I think that would help a lot.
And thanks, Doug, for teeing that up. And there's legislation that's been introduced. It's been introduced at the national level for the last probably 4 or 5 years. It just hasn't gotten across the finish line. That legislation would dramatically increase the low-income housing tax credits, which are actually a little bit misnamed, quite honestly, because the credits can serve families up to 80% of area median income, as long as the average isn't above 60% of area median income. And if you actually look at those numbers, that is not anybody, that's not a family anybody would consider low income. Those are just our working families in Hampton Roads. But one thing the state has done as well is the Housing Opportunity Tax Credit, which is a great, great thing. That is a state tax credit that helps us leverage the federal credit to build more and more housing. So that this year was funded at $70 million, which is great, but we need more. And the bottom line, getting to that, is that because of a many-decade gap between the increase in our average family income and the cost of housing, the cost to produce housing, either rental or for sale, we have a huge affordability gap, and that does take a subsidy, unfortunately.
I'd like to bring in a few other folks. I know we had a light on over here, ma'am. Did you want to? And then Dr. Agarwal, come to you.
And I think we're starting to get into this conversation, but what I'd like to see in the housing assessment is the other barriers that are keeping us from hitting our goals. Land use controls, code enforcements, any other non-governmental constraints that are keeping us from actually making this happen regionally.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Agarwal.
As I have to agree with Steve completely that unless you increase supply, nothing's going to happen. So however we can increase supply is absolutely very crucial. One distinction I'd like to make up front is, and Bobby, you pointed out that you're having problems with the city council and on this new development. I think if you use the word affordable housing, that has different connotation politically than if you were to call it workforce housing. It turns out that most of us who live in single-family homes, large lots, we do not want affordable housing in our backyard. This is a fact of life, whether we like it or not, this is what happens. However, if you were to use that term workforce housing, that has completely different connotations. So to talk about affordable housing, or what's it, housing affordability, these are really two different issues. Workforce housing is a must. For example, Go Virginia has a plan of trying to attract high-paying jobs, which is beautiful. However, to get those high-paying jobs, you still need support jobs. So where are these people going to live if they can't even afford to rent? or buy. So workforce housing is very crucial. If we did a study a few years ago for the State of the Region report, where proportion of households who are really burdened by the cost of housing is phenomenal in Hampton Roads. We keep on talking about that our housing prices, median housing prices are much lower compared to other metro areas. But that does not look at the ratio of the cost of housing to incomes. If you are paying more than 50% of income for shelter, we're in trouble. So there's no question about it. Whatever we do, we need to increase supply. And I think the term affordable housing has its own political nuances. I think if we're to focus, I'm not saying that we don't need affordable housing. Do not get me wrong, please. But if you were to start with workforce housing initiatives, that can go a long further away with all our elected officials than issues on affordable housing.
And I think those are great points, which is why we've been very careful to call this a regional housing assessment, right? And we're going to be looking at all ends of the spectrum. Andy Stevenson, maybe I wouldn't mind coming to you, your Centerra partner. Nancy Gurdon came in the back of the room, and we've heard your CEO talk about the challenge that Centerra is as you recruit employees and what that's presenting to related to the housing market, some challenges for you, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And to piggyback on what Dr. Agrawal just said, you know, in Centerra being the second largest private employer in the Commonwealth of Virginia, our employment field runs the gamut of salary. You know, we want those high-paying, well-trained docs to make sure that our quality of care stays up, but we need those support people to help our hospitals run. So we need every level of housing to make sure we're hitting those things just for our employees. Now, when you go back to the folks that we're taking care of on our Centerra Health Plan side too, you know, we have 750,000 Medicaid members that we're taking care of as well. When you look at the social determinants of health, housing is one of the #1 issues on those social determinants of health. So when we go back to that other slide, when what we looked at were those intersections of housing, there's a reason that health was #1 on that list. You know, how are you going to find medicine or anything else if you don't have a secure place to live? So workforce housing, absolutely. What is the supply for single family $700,000 houses, $1 million houses that will attract those economic big companies to our areas? But we need to figure out what our supply is at every level: low income, affordable housing, workforce housing, you know, middle, normal, we'll say normal housing that all of us live in. And then, you know, where do the big dogs live? You know, and what does that look like? And then how do we think outside the box? Are there churches that have huge plots of land or land trusts that we might be able to get into with the private sector? I know Centerra does a lot of work with LISC, and, you know, thankfully Jay's around the table and what they're doing, both not only here in Hampton Roads, but nationwide. So, and then as those community partners come together, how can we put our arms around each other and maybe come up with something regional? And regional for Centerra absolutely means regional. We're in every city of Hampton Roads, if not the Commonwealth as well. So this is something that we're really looking at, both for our workforce as well as the folks we have the privilege to care for.
Thank you, Andy. Brian Kozel from Virginia Housing, would you mind if I'd ask you to give a little perspective of what you're seeing across the Commonwealth? And, you know, when you think of our regional housing assessment, are there, you know, we've heard great input about supply and other things today, but I'm just curious what advice you might give us.
Sure. I mean, I think what I would say, it probably echoes a lot of what's already been said, right? And I kind of look at it as a funnel of funding, right? Most of the funding for affordable housing or workforce housing, whatever we want to call it, comes from the federal government through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, and also through the form of rental assistance, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Then the state is the next level, and we fund at the state $60 million per year of the new Housing Opportunity Tax Credit Program, $75 million a year for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, which is a gap financing mechanism, which also goes to support some homeless reduction grants for nonprofit organizations across the Commonwealth. And then it's local, right? And so what are we putting in at the local level, and that varies, right? Long story short, none of it is enough, right? In comparison, and I mentioned this, we spend about $1.4 billion to house roughly 45,000 inmates through our correctional facilities each year, right? And so if we could just, achieve some parity in what we're actually prioritizing in our funding, this is an issue that we could conceivably address. But it's not only supply, right? There's also demand side issue, right? But I don't think if Lawson Companies took over the world, you would still be hard pressed to scale up to meet the demand in a reasonable amount of time, right? You've got limitations, workforce, skilled, unskilled labor, across the board, right? So
Labor is a very
huge
constraint.
right? And so we've also got to meet the demand, right? And so how do we do that? Well, we can provide rental assistance for folks, working families that need assistance to meet the demand. And the wage disparity, right? Costs have increased, wages have remained relatively flat for the last 40 years. So, there's a lot of downward pressure on the working class in the Commonwealth and across the country. So, but it does touch all aspects, right? I mean, if we talk about educational outcomes and learning loss for kids in the pandemic, right? What's the biggest factor? You need a stable place to learn, right? You need a stable place to call home. And I've heard stories. I'm in Richmond. I've heard stories of teachers starting the year with 27 kids. And by the end of the year, it's an entirely new set of 27 kids, right? And that is housing instability caused by downward pressures on working class families. So it is a solvable problem, and it is really reassuring to see so many local leaders coming together regionally, and hopefully these conversations result in a coordinated effort with political leadership, kind of to address this very, very complex issue.
Ms. McClellan, I'm sorry, Ms. McClellan, I know you wanted to weigh in, and then Mayor Dyer will come your way.
Yeah, thank you. When we talk about supply, it seems the main focus has been on multifamily development and new development. But we haven't talked about NOAA, which is the naturally occurring affordable housing. In a lot of our municipalities, particularly in Norfolk, we have a lot of housing stock, old single-family units, individual units that we also need to address. We can't ignore that. And I feel like that oftentimes when we talk about housing, we're only talking about the new. And so I want to make sure as we're thinking about an assessment, we're also looking at that in ways that we, at the local level, at the state level, federal level, that we can incentivize the rehabilitation of those housing units so that we can lower the energy burden, for example, for those individuals who are living there. Right now in the state, we have, I think it's about $45 million through the HIEE, which is funded by RGGI, to address single-family units and to provide energy efficiency to lower the energy burden. And in Hampton Roads, we are not able to draw down on any of that because we don't have a WAP, a weatherization approved provider. there's literally money at the state level right now that could help. But we don't have a nonprofit ready to do that. So that's one thing. But I do think we've got to not only focus, with all due respect, Mr. Lawson, the new multifamily units, we've got to be thinking about the NOAA ones as well. And let me also add to the point made about learning loss. When we're talking about affordable housing, we also have to be talking about affordable broadband. It is a utility that is going to allow folks to live and kids to learn. And so you can't just have an affordable housing unit. You also have to have affordable broadband and good quality transit to go along with that too.
So keeping in line with thinking about what our assessment can collect in terms of information, that really helps everyone with your work. And Ms. McClellan, to your point, right? Not just focusing on the new, but looking at the rehab and what are the best practices, what are other communities doing, that would be a very important part of the assessment. Mayor Dyer, I know you had some thoughts. Rick, I'd like to hear about what we can do to help the military too, because I know this is high on your list. But Mayor Dyer, would you?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the comments so far have been nothing short of outstanding. But I really think that a regional context and approach is going to depend on regional political, courage going forward. That we're going to have to go forward and go against some of the tide that's out there. One of the things that we have to combat are the stigmas that we're going to be confronting. And, once again, I'm committed to this. And with the controversial project, which should not be controversial, but is, I've been labeled in the pockets of developers and, all the other things that come with opposing forces that are out there. So we got to do the right thing for the right reasons. And one of the things, and I think Steve alluded to it, there are no simple solutions. If they were, we would have used them. But we have a very narrow window of things that we can accomplish. One thing, if we had the land, which we don't, they can put these tiny homes on them and, that would, fill a lot of problems. We don't have that luxury right now. And so, the political courage is going to have to come, not just from any city, but us as working in unison. And that way we would help each other because we're not the only ones out there doing it. And the other innovation, in terms of not only new housing, I'll give you an example. We had in Virginia Beach, Kemps River Shopping Center. It was right near Indian River Road and Kemps Hill Road. Once very prosperous. Farm Fresh closed, Kmart closed, Rite Aid left. It's a dead shopping mall. And so once again, we've had the idea of putting multi-purpose housing. Businesses, housing, we're only a mile away, from the only interchange in Virginia Beach on I-64, an ideal location. The pushback from the communities was overwhelming. But then we went out and educated the public, and then convinced them that there would be actually less traffic considerations, if we revitalized the mall. And so then all of a sudden, that turned into a unanimous vote for it. So once again, looking at strategies like infill development and repurposing and, going into neighborhoods, maybe you get a huge shopping mall and redo it. But the other thing is maybe also making some considerations that we really encourage developers, to put workforce housing in. And the other thing is, this was really controversial, and social media beat me up. During the retreat that we had when we talked about this, we talked about when we passed our laws regarding stormwater management, Virginia Beach went draconian. We far exceeded the state requirements to the point where it significantly raised the cost of doing business. And let me give you an example. We put a new housing unit off Northampton Boulevard, and near the Burton Station area. A studio apartment was renting for $1,500 a month. Okay? And that's what my mortgage was when I had one. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of disposable income being tied into there. So we're making a recommendation, and then we actually had a briefing yesterday in City Council, and I'll get the copy of it about strategies that we can use from, authorities and, taxes and, forgiveness and things of that nature. We'll get it to you. But one of the things they mentioned was the permit process, and I think that was mentioned before. And, the developers pass it on to the people that own it. And so there's a lot of strategies that we can incorporate. But, unfortunately, the situation is not a simple one. It's going to be complex, but it's going to take the political courage pretty much from everybody in this room, to get on the same, wavelength and just go out and get it done as a region.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Brown, I know you have some thoughts.
Thank you, Bob. Just wanted to share, I'm just getting back from a trip to South Korea last week. And as I was preparing to land in Seoul, I noticed a lot of high-rise buildings. And I thought they were business buildings and office spaces and all. And I asked, once I landed, I asked the translator, what were all these buildings? She said they were apartment complexes. And so I kind of got inquisitive. I asked her, I said, well, what is the average rent for these units? I mean, they were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of units at like 20 stories, 25 stories, 30 stories. I said, what's the average rent? She said it would be equivalent to $400 a month. And I asked her, I said, does that include any utilities? You pay your own gas, light, and water. And so I thought about this because sometimes the challenge for council members and legislators are zoning laws and codes compliance as it relates to density. And because the developer comes into Hampton and wants to build on property that's, you can build on, a lot of the questions ask how many units? And what's the cost of the units and what will they sell for? And so we have to also begin to look at how we can affect some changes in zoning. That's a major piece to whether you use the term affordable housing or workforce housing. Another thing I want to caution us here is to be sensitive to the term, whether it's affordable or workforce. I was raised in public housing. I spent about 10 years living in public housing. And I bought my first house at age 30. And I'm thinking when I moved, I'm going to make this very short, moved to the community, I didn't know anything about upkeep of a home, the integrity of the neighborhood, housing values, and all that. I learned very quickly because I had behind my yard, behind my fence was called an easement. And I didn't know that I was responsible for cutting the easement. And so I was there like 30 days and the city sent me a notice to cut the grass back. I'm going, why I got to cut the grass back there? I don't own that property. But I since learned. But so I want to say when we talk about affordable housing, let's be sensitive to not to just assume that people who live in affordable housing may not maintain their homes. They may do things that will hurt the integrity of housing values, or there are people who may do things untoward. So we got to be very careful that when we look at this, we don't stereotype folks, not intentionally, but unintentionally. So I want to make sure we keep that at the forefront.
Great points.
So I
Deidre?
just want to touch on that, and I'm just going to echo Mayor Dyer and Dr. Agarwal, and my friend over here, Ms. McKeel. Let's do away with the term. Let's stop using it in the context of affordable housing, and it's going to take us to start doing that so that the public gets that same message, right? And once we begin to turn that around, we all know what affordable housing sounds like in most areas. But let's do away with the term. And we just want, and that's why we came up, and coined the term housing for all, because what's affordable to you may not be affordable to someone else. What Section 8 looks like for you may not look like for someone else. And so it looks different everywhere. Delegate Price said the face of unhoused people are changing. And so let's just do away with the term affordable housing. And so we talked about that messaging and what that messaging looks like when we do this assessment so that the community does not back away, turn their heads, don't want it, not in my backyard mentality, so that we can get this done for our region. Ms. McGill.
Great point.
I just want to add to that, and thank you for that. I think one of the things that I've heard as I've been doing this work is housing as infrastructure. Some of these conversations around language would not be taking place if we were talking about roadways or stormwater or any of those things. But as soon as we start talking about housing, we want to start to say it's affordable, it's low income, it's workforce, it's all of these things, but it's really infrastructure. If we're saying everyone is entitled to good quality, safe housing, then it's infrastructure. And we should start managing it and working toward that end of speaking it to be infrastructure.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is maybe go around the room here. Reagan, I know I've spoke with your association, and this is an issue very important for them. Can you help us with how our assessment might be able to help your organization in its work?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say kind of off of what you were saying, we don't use the term affordable housing because it can be confused by people that you're, maybe trying to do some sort of Section 8 or subsidized housing, and it's more or less housing affordability, but we use the word attainable housing. Attainable people can actually access. Two things I think, and it's already kind of been said, that I think would be helpful in your assessment is kind of what Steve said, looking at the developable land that we have, and not only, how much land is available, but how that land is zoned. And luckily for us, there is a nonprofit who is working to unroll a zoning atlas that looks through the peninsula and as well as the south side at all of the greenfields, developable land and what it's zoned for. And that's where really that dirty word of density comes in, because a lot of that land is not zoned for multiple units. We just had something out in Suffolk where, kind of like what Mayor Dyer was saying, these people come out like a Yellowstone episode and start getting really crazy about not in my backyard and they put pressure on city council members that influence them to not want to ruffle any feathers and not rezone the land when the units are what's going to make housing more attainable. And they just see the developers probably being greedy and everything else like that. And so another thing with kind of our developers and builders greedy, and I know I'm here from the Builders Association, so I probably sound biased, but I just wanted to implore that I think you should really look, whether it's single family or multifamily, what the cost is to build a home. I know that, for a single family home right now, you're looking at about $93,000 that's just contributed to regulatory cost. So your lot, that might be $100,000, $150,000, no matter where you get it. Add on that $93,000 of regulatory costs, and that's, changes to the building code. It's architectural design standards beyond the ordinary, stormwater, things like that is $93,000. So you're already at $300,000. They haven't even put a hole in the ground. So how are we supposed to build a home that's $250,000, $300,000, which is what someone in their 30s can afford, if we're already at $300,000 before the home's even built? So that would be something I think would be good. I mean, I know I just gave you $93,000, but maybe looking by each municipality.
Yeah, thank you, Reagan. Can we sort of go around the table? I just want to be certain everybody has an opportunity. If you'd like to offer something, okay. If you have nothing to add, that's okay too. But maybe sort of staying with Reagan, that was really helpful. But how can our housing assessment, what type of information can we be looking at? Can we go around the table and make certain everybody has a chance?
Georgette from Virginia Housing. I'm coming from the perspective of what the assessment needs. I'm on the single family end of it, home ownership. And Councilwoman, Ms. McMullen, she made a good point in reference to existing homes. Not just multifamily, homes needed for single family, for ownership. And there's not enough resources out there to provide, that we have so many potential buyers out there, but there's no down payment resources, there are no renovation loans to assist with renovating these homes, as well as closing cost assistance. And I know we're dealing with an inventory issue. Keep in mind, I'm from the single family home ownership, but we're dealing with a rate issue as well. I mean, rates have doubled, so people can't qualify for what they could qualify 2 years ago. So those are issues that we are facing, as well as the resources available. All of the localities having resources available for down payment and closing cost assistance, as well as assistance of renovating these homes. When we go back to affordability, and I was just looking up, at Virginia Housing, we do have maximum household income limits that we provide, based on that we're able to provide homeowners with. And in Hampton Roads, attainable housing, that's what you're talking about, but the face of housing has changed for everyone. For a household of 2 or fewer, our maximum household income limit is $98,000. And they can't find houses in that price within that household income limit. So we do need to change the name, and because we just need housing. We're having an issue with inventory, as well as we're looking at the gap for the resources that are available for individuals within that income range.
Thank you. And we absolutely agree, which is why our team has framed this the regional housing assessment, because to all the great points made, it's through the entire spectrum that we're looking at. If we could go around, if there's any comments, anybody else, I just want to give everybody an opportunity.
Sure. I'm Linda Rice from the Hampton Roads Community Foundation, and I think for the assessment, I'd be interested in what is the role of philanthropy in this work? There are many funders throughout Virginia that are thinking about the same thing. Our capacity is certainly not that to build massive structures, but what is our role in this? And then the foundation last year in November offered a wonderful webinar event on housing, and I would recommend that you look at it. It's on our website, and thank you, Mr. Lawson was part of the panel, Sharnita was part of the panel, and Housing Forward Virginia did an excellent presentation, and it was to make the community more aware of what the issues are. And then thirdly, I think it's important to assess what the nonprofit community, as a foundation, we work very closely with the nonprofit community, and I've been hearing for the last 5 years at every interaction I have with them, the critical need for housing and how it's impacting their ability to work with clients. And I think it's important to not forget our nonprofit community does excellent work with individuals, and they are being stressed in their case management work because there's a lack of housing.
Thank you. Thank you. Our neighbors next door, up in Crater, any perspective you can provide? So the Crater Planning District Commission is up in the Phillipsburg, the Petersburg area. My apologies.
Yeah,
The Petersburg area.
I'm not a stakeholder for this region, so I don't want to eat up too much airspace, but I do think that it is really interesting hearing about another region that is dealing with a certain degree of dispersal, especially when so many metro regions are dealing with a more single nucleic structure. But one thought that I've had, just because I haven't heard anyone bring it up yet, is the role that public housing plays in the housing landscape here. I don't know anything about the public housing landscape in this region, I'll be totally candid, but when we're talking about supply, and particularly existing supply, I think that needs to be part of the conversation, beyond just an opportunity for development, because I know that there are a lot of mixed feelings about the future of public housing, especially because of federal restrictions on building more of it. But a lot of times when public housing gets redeveloped into mixed income, we wind up with a net loss of affordable units. And so I'd just be, interested in how the region sees public housing playing into the future of the housing landscape.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for coming down. Scott, anything you wanted to add?
Bob, I don't know that I have anything more to add. I will tell you, I think we all face some of what has been addressed here as perceptions. and development. And I will tell you, we've got a neighborhood that's $800,000 single-family homes. It's upset about $1 million homes, single-family, and being built behind them. So you talk about, we've all faced those kind of challenges. So when you talk about high density, and then you get into affordable or workforce or attainable, people get to a whole new level. And again, we all, I expect, have gone through housing assessments. James City has done that. We all support it until it's right here, and then we're against it. And that is something that I think we really have got to work on beyond the assessment of the perception and showing them developments that are successful, that are good neighbors, and are places many of us around this table would be okay living there, because people are afraid of that development and what that will do to them. And so that's just an ongoing effort, I think, for us.
Fantastic. Moving down the table, yes.
Charvela West United Way on the peninsula. One thing that I'd like the assessment to consider is the cost of time. We've talked a lot about supply and new development, and having worked to advocate for a low-income housing tax credit property to be built 4 years ago. The clubhouse is just now opening. And so what have we lost in terms of workforce development, educational outcomes, and things like that as we work through these challenges? And then in the meantime, what does it look like to help people afford housing better, the housing that we do have? What is the cost of subsidy and subsidizing current housing and current rental, maybe through localized or even regional voucher programs as a potential solution?
Great, thank you. Anyone else going around the corner?
I'm Beth Lewis from Southampton County. We have probably a pretty good number of vacant homes, but they're pretty close to uninhabitable because they need rehabilitation. We got money this year to rehab 9 houses from DHCD, only 9. Finding contractors to do the work is pretty close to impossible, but even in the end, it's only 9. But there are quite a few vacant that need to be rehabbed, but DHCD doesn't provide funds for rehabbing vacant houses. So if you could rehab those houses and make them livable again, you would have a source of attainable housing. Also in Southampton County, there are areas that the zoning would permit smaller lot development, but we don't have the water and sewer capability. So when you have to have a well and septic, you have to have a lot of a certain size to be able to provide those services with well and septic. And there aren't funds to extend water and sewer lines to areas that could be developed with, smaller lots, not acre lots, but quarter-acre lots, if they didn't have to have a well and septic.
Thank you. So just for the spirit of time, if I could, Andy, I'd like to give everybody who hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet a chance for input. I apologize for jumping over, but I know I know that I'm probably going to start losing people in a little bit. But could we go around? Yes, please. Go ahead, Sherry. I know you haven't had a chance yet.
Just to add to the assessment, I would just say sort of the non-traditional voices. We have health plan outreach housing specialist. I would love to hear what they have to say, because oftentimes I think what we think is happening is not actually happening. And so I've had the experience of walking with a family member through near eviction, and all of the resources go to completely unstably housed people, and there's no, there's really a difficult time trying to navigate how do we prevent that. And I think that's what we're all saying here, is how do we make sure we're along the continuum addressing those urgent things, but also those generational things. So those non-traditional voices as part of the assessment. I'll echo what Linda Rice said around the nonprofit community. Habitat's rehabbing houses right now for us. We're working with them to identify high-risk neighborhoods, and then they are working with vulnerable seniors to create a situation so that they're not losing their homes. So those would be the 2 things that I would encourage as part of the assessment.
Fantastic, thank you. Jim, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. One of the things I've heard today is great. It's kind of, to me, there's a train going down the track and it's 2 different sets of tracks. But the one that we have not addressed is the educational piece of those folks that need to get into these houses. Do we know what's the barrier of entry for folks that can't get into housing? And whether it's affordable, whether it's workforce, those are the things we need to understand because whatever those barriers are, we need to take those down.
Very good. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Chris McNamara with Virginia Housing again. I'm on our community outreach team, so I spend most of my time traveling the state, meeting with different localities, regions. So for this report, make sure you're looking at what other regions are doing. We're talking about putting faces to what this means. Up in Northern Virginia, there's an organization called HAND. They just came out with a tool that's like a sliding scale where you raise the rent and it shows who can actually afford that. So it's a teacher, a fireman, lawyer, whatever. In the Stanton region, there's a nonprofit that did a program called This Is Home, and it's pictures of people who are unhoused. You wouldn't know it looking at them. There's a picture on a school step. It says there's like 10 kids in the picture. 5 of them don't have a home tonight. Who are they? So it's just putting a face to that. Looking around like New River Valley, they're doing some great stuff with land trusts. Danville, that region has really started treating housing as economic development. They are hosting their second housing summit in 2 weeks. If anyone can go to that, I definitely suggest it. They're bringing developers in from around the country to look at their region to see what they need to do, and it's based off what they found in their assessment.
Very good. Thank you for that. Brian and Steve, I don't mean to jump over you, but I'd like to give a few other folks a chance that haven't commented yet. Eric, any perspective you wanted to add?
Yeah. As Eric Wahlberg with PDC, as Greg had mentioned earlier, one of my responsibilities is to convene the planning directors for the region. We just met yesterday to discuss agenda topics over the next year, and certainly housing is one of the issues that we spent some time thinking about. And it strikes me that as a group, the directors are really being pulled in a lot of different directions on this topic. And I think that anything we can do to provide examples of best practices and in particular examples of smart urban design from other communities that solve this dilemma in a way that is acceptable to the broader community. I think that tension, for the directors between the desires of the citizens and the need to address this topic in a meaningful way it's a real tension, and anything we can do to help them resolve that will I think help move this forward.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Tim, anything you wanted to add?
I don't want to belabor what's been said many times before. The county, York County, is actually small enough that we do have a pretty good handle on our future housing supply, and it's not a lot. Based on the amount of developable land and the zoning that's in place, it comes to about 4,200 units, 2,500 of which are already in the development pipeline. So that leaves 1,700 additional units. Right now we've got about 28,000. I don't see that number changing for all the reasons that have been stated: lack of political will, NIMBYism, stigma attached to housing, the stigma attached to density. We did a survey, and the majority of citizens supported the goal of more moderately priced housing, and a majority of them were opposed to higher density. So I'm not sure how we get around this disconnect. And we have, I think every locality probably has a organized anti-development group. We have one in our county that is very vocal, and when people come in to talk about residential rezonings, we just tell them the lay of the land, and most of them walk away. So I don't know how to get around that exactly.
Well, since we're both from York County, I won't belabor this too much, but exactly what Tim's saying, that we do have a very limited amount of developable land left. So from my perspective in the housing office, we're really looking at ways that we can preserve the existing affordable housing, that naturally occurring stock that we have, trying to preserve that. I know listening to you talking about trying to make sure we don't get in the position where we have those vacant units and we keep those units inhabitable. I think Charvela's point about the subsidy is a key. Rental rates in York County are absolutely ridiculous. So for those folks who aren't fortunate enough to get a housing voucher or other subsidy, other ways that we can find subsidy layering to make it affordable for them is going to be crucial. And then, looking at what, in areas where there is um, need some redevelopment, I think. But hopefully, we'll have some suggestions.
Thank you.
Yes,
Liz, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Bob. Jay Grant with Lisk Hampton Roads Local Initiatives Support Corporation. So, piggybacking off of what Ms. McClellan said about the aging housing stock, from an economic development standpoint, we're competing with so many other regions. Actually, I'm headed to my wife's family down in North Carolina this evening. And when I look at North Carolina, particularly the Triangle area, they have one of the youngest housing stocks in the country. People are flocking to that area, and so we're an older region. We have an older housing stock, and so we need to embrace it. We need to figure out ways where we can reinvent our housing stock, and so that gets to my next point, which is at Lisk. A lot of what we do is involved with the financing of whether it's on a small scale or a larger scale. We partner, of course, largely with Centerra. They're our founding funder. And so, we need to continually look at how we can creatively finance, how we can creatively inject grant resources into projects. But I really think, again, from an economic development standpoint, we've got to reinvent our housing stock so that outsiders don't think of us as this place that doesn't have any housing product for them, whatever that product is. Companies are looking at it, individuals are looking at it. And then, of course, from an affordable standpoint, we have to also accept, sadly, that prices are not going to come down. Construction prices, we have to accept the interest rate where it is. Hopefully, that will come down. But again, it involves a lot of creativity. How do we combat these high interest rates and high costs to get these products out there?
Thank you. It's coming around the corner. Anybody else want to add anything?
Hi, Mark Patel with the City of Norfolk. Just having boots on the ground, working with folks who are building the housing in the St. Paul's redevelopment. Want to just piggyback on the labor component. It's aging. We have, there's brick all over these buildings, and the masons are averaging, age 55. And in this region, we have apprenticeships for the shipbuilding. They're creating that pipeline. We're not necessarily seeing that in the labor trade. They're coming from different regions, and then they're taking that money in the buildings here and reinvesting it in their communities outside of Hampton Roads, when we could be recruiting here and using that workforce to develop the housing when it does come, when you all solve that problem.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Jonathan McBride with the City of Hampton. Definitely a supply issue. I think we don't want to lose the fact that we're really wrestling with the environmental vulnerable areas in our communities. So while we're trying to increase supply, we need to make sure that we've got data that helps us do that in a smart growth approach, so that we're doing it in the areas that we can sustain in the long run, especially with sea level rise challenges. So we're anticipating in the long run we are going to lose housing stock in certain areas at some point because of flooding. So just being prepared in that data sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Konak with Chesapeake Housing Authority again, and so I'm going to piggyback on the word of the day, multi-nucleic. So we have I think we need to recognize, and hopefully this assessment can help, that NIMBYism is multi-nucleic. So, we can write off the white racist ignorance and that kind of thing, but we really need a mindset change to meet people where they are, because all of us in this room are very unlikely to stand up at a public hearing and oppose a quality housing project, but there are certainly lots of people who are, and we need to recognize that there are substantive reasons for folks to be fearful, and if this assessment can help educate not only how stable housing can lead to economic development goals, but also strengthen neighborhoods. So the idea that the housing demand is really turning a lot of somewhat marginal neighborhoods from owner occupied to predominantly rental and with lack of ownership and care in their neighborhoods. Just the advocacy that we can have through this housing assessment to show that quality housing for all, meeting the entire housing continuum, can actually strengthen neighborhoods, can maybe not be a threat. But it's still, we have to come up with the idea that these aren't just evil, ignorant people for the most part. These are folks who really are concerned about the investments they've made in their homes and their neighborhoods, and we need to meet them where they are. So I'll just leave it
Great
there.
points. Thank you.
Bill Young from Four Kids, living in a nonprofit that is at the nexus of a lot of this work. Our hotline received over 60,000 calls last year from 35,000 households experiencing a housing crisis. That's about a 20% increase from the previous year. And most of what our people have to say on a daily basis is no. We don't have any help for you. The help is gone. Here's a safety plan. Walmart has lights. We really don't have those. And what I would, specific to the amen to all, yes, supply, yes to various subsidies and the like. Specific to the assessment, I'd make 2 points, which is one, I think this room probably has more assessments and studies that are hiding in drawers, unused, unacted on. And so the first piece of that, I would say, is an encouragement to make it a living assessment. So to the extent that we have an inventory that is maintained over time, what does it look like? How do we keep that on a year-to-year basis? And that when we cut ribbon and everybody gets excited, we recognize that maybe we lost 90 units down the way, and that cutting of the ribbon for 60 new units or 120 units may actually be a net negative to the community. And then the second thing would be, is that real focus on how do these solutions happen? I love to hear Mayor Dyer talk about political courageousness, because I think political courageousness is a critical piece to how you can actually get something like this across the finish line, and community organizing of who will stand up for something, because we already know there are plenty that will stand against, so that our political leaders can hear maybe a hidden majority of folks that could be okay with many things. But really is the how do you get it across the finish line and not create yet another assessment that someone says, remember that great assessment in 23? That was awesome.
Thank you. Surrey County?
Horace Wade, Surrey County, representing a relatively small county. One of the, I'm in community development. My concerns are constraints to development. And we talked a little bit about constraints. Some of those constraints are environmental. Some of those are water and sewer. We echo that same sentiment with water and sewer. We're actually working on a water and sewer master plan for Surrey County. And we do have some congressional money that we do have to help build some of those actual resources that we need. We've been working with, I guess, a national builder, last year, and trying to mirror or work with our comprehensive plan that we have on future residential development in places where we would actually have water and sewer. And one of the concerns is land that's available, even though it's identified in our comprehensive plan. Actually being able to obtain that land for purchase to be developed. And after working with this potential national builder, they found some property that they were wish to purchase. Working through talking with that landowner, the cost to acquire that property was so large because Surrey County has so few property purchases. The actual purchase of that property would change the landscape of future properties for sale in the county. So that purchase of property would actually value new purchases and outprice anyone looking for land. So that's a new. I didn't think about that before, but there was something that's for us to consider. Cost to attain property would have an effect on future purchases of other properties. So,
Sarah Jane?
I think most things have been said, but I will circle back actually to perhaps we potentially need to do a comparison so we can get some best practices from communities that are very similar to ours with the same challenges that we have with regards to the environment, et cetera, with sea level rise. And then I would just caution us that, we have a lot of really amazing young individuals, and coming from ODU, we have a lot of graduating individuals that they're great talent right here. So we need to really tap into them and ask them what they would like and let them have a voice too.
Rick, I know Harumfa has been discussing the housing issue.
Sure, sure. As we go around and talk to the military and federal installation leaders throughout Hampton Roads, the last several years, as with a lot of places around the country, the affordability of housing for their employees and military members has been a major concern. And to Andy's point, it's from, the primary concern is usually with junior service members, but it goes all the way up to, the engineers at NASA Langley or the researchers at Jefferson Lab, trying to find suitable housing when they're trying to recruit those types of employees. In terms of the housing assessment, what might be helpful for that is looking at the major employment centers around the region and what's available near those, because as we hear from the military is they're trying to find suitable housing for their service members, not too far from the base, because lots of times military members get called in at all kinds of different hours, so they want to be commuting from an hour away. But another key aspect is where are housing opportunities in relation to quality school systems, to childcare availability, because that is a major issue, especially when we're talking about military needs, is there's not enough capacity to house service members on base. I mean, 70 to 80% of the military live out in our communities, and there's not enough childcare capacity on the installation, so they are relying on the community. So when I know from my own experience throughout my career, one of the first things when I got orders to a new place is my wife was online looking for where are the good schools, where are childcare needs, those kinds of things, and that drove where we were trying to live. And it's no real different, I think, from a lot of economic development opportunities. When the military is looking at bringing in new missions or moving missions around the country, they are looking at the affordability of a location in that calculus. It's no different than a major employer when they're going to say, how much am I going to have to pay my people to be able to afford to live here? The housing allowance comes into is a calculation that DoD is looking at when they're making decisions about where they're going to put new missions or move missions away from. So that's something to consider going forward. In fact, and going back to the schools piece in terms of how that intersection of housing availability and quality schools, Congress mandated several years ago that each of the services come up with a quality of life scorecard where they specifically measure the quality of the school systems around every installation in the country. And so that is being factored in when the government is looking in terms of where they're going to put these new missions around the country.
Thanks, Rick. Before I go to Drew, Susan Gaston, and I apologize, she represents the Virginia Peninsula Realtors Association, but Greg and Deidre, they have some excellent information that they can provide and serve as a resource for our assessment. So we'll have an opportunity to follow up with them and take advantage of some of that great data. I think will be helpful to us. So thank you for that, Susan. Drew?
Just briefly, I think something that was said implicitly in a lot of this is sort of what is the percentage of income that in each locality that people are using for rent and mortgage. I mean, what is that housing constraint number and what percentage of each population is at that? I mean, because those are the people that are one paycheck or a government shutdown, for example, away from problems.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So Nikki does have that information, that demographic information. And we know that percentage is really high. Most people are paying, I think someone over here said it, upwards of 50% of their income toward housing. Right. That's right.
Sean?
Sean Avery, Hampton Roads Workforce Council. I'm definitely not a housing expert, so I really don't have much to add to the assessment other than we need it, Bob. I need you to hurry up and get it finished because we are having, it is a chicken and the egg thing. We are having workforce shortages because we can't recruit people in the region because there's no housing for it. And so how do we make sure that we have the housing for those individuals? So I need you to come up with the solutions. The other thing I'd suggest too is, and I don't see him around the table, it's great to see Crater here, but we're 20 minutes from the North Carolina border. 30 minutes. I mean, right across the border, we could potentially have some workforce housing. I know it's a little bit out of the way, but maybe bringing them into the discussion. We're going down into North Carolina now to find workers to bring up here. So, how do they factor into this?
Yeah, great point, Sean. And how many of us know more and more people that are driving over to North Carolina line for housing, right? and they're working here. Delegate?
Yeah, thank you. And bear with me on how my brain works. I think for the different hats that I wear, some of the questions that would be helpful, an actual amount of money that's needed. So there are elected officials that will sit at a table and congratulate themselves on the 60 and the 70 million dollars because that sounds like a lot of money. But if I can be able to say that's not enough, it's actually X that's needed, I think that is very helpful in moving the needle at the state level. What are the obstacles that you find within the law that make your job harder? And so, yes, we're not trying to build houses that are not safe, right? So just because it's inconvenient, but like an actual obstacle, the red tape that we could discuss on at the state level, what could be done, and then obstacles for those that are navigating the systems that you have. So your clients, your users, what are some of those obstacles and how could we help? Is this the centralized place for info? Like, it's become very territorial. I would like to know where to come back to continue this conversation. So is it here? Do I bring my legislators here? Is it HRPDC? I don't care, right? I'm not invested in that answer. I just need to know so that we're not having this same exact conversation 5 times a year and not moving forward. What can be done, especially with those that interact with the community? What can we do to proactively have educational opportunities? We know what we're trying to get to. How can we bring the community along with us? How can we build out continuity of our plan beyond the current folks that are in these seats? So if I lose reelection, I still want this work to continue. So how do we build out that continuity? What's the role of slumlords in our crisis, and how do we crack down on that? What are the other intersectional issues that we need to be tackling? If I can go into a gun violence prevention conversation and be able to have the data to link it to the housing crisis, that is very helpful. And then also just trying to see what are the bipartisan I don't know if that word exists anymore, but what are the overlapping areas of philosophies of the current elected so that while we're building out our 10-year plan, we can have movement over the next 2 years in this new upcoming legislature term?
Fantastic. Greg, why don't I ask, and if I can ask for forgiveness for the others around the corner here, the delegate asked a really important question, right? Where is going to be that touch point, that convener for this housing conversation? And we are hopeful that is going to be us. And Greg, would you mind talking about our course forward and in terms of where we go from today?
Certainly. I mean, this has been really instructive, and I think one of the things, when you look at the face of the unhoused, I guess most people don't think of it as, you just don't think of it that often. Four Kids mentions that all the phone calls that they receive. You get Four Kids, Salvation Army, the Planning Council, our localities. The face of the unhoused is these people calling, looking for help. As the delegate just mentioned, typically when people are calling for help for housing, there's a lot of stuff on their plate in addition to housing that they're also struggling with. And so that's really when we look at this assessment, we're trying to, there's been a lot of discussion today on affordable housing and workforce housing, but there's a whole gauntlet of housing issues that Deidre and I talked about that all factor into this. So what we're really looking to do is the next steps. We at the Planning District Commission, we never want to get ahead of our board. We never want to get ahead of our localities. But everything that you all have brought forward has been very instructive so that we can bring this before our board and say, here's what we've heard from the community, here's what we've heard from our partners, here's what we've heard from people who are in this place that need access to housing. what do you want us to do next? And I'm hopeful that at our next planning district commission, they'll encourage us to proceed forward with a housing assessment, at least to get that lay of the land, so that we can start, so that we can be that place that prepares the plan, make it a living plan. I love that idea. It has to be a living plan, so that we can find the places where we get the biggest return on our investment, right? Economics is about scarcity, and resources are always scarce. So when people plug in and people want to help, we want to know, where can you plug in and get the biggest return for your investment on addressing the whole list of housing issues that we have in this region. But the assessment is that first step, and I think our board understands that, and you all have been very helpful to getting us to that point. And to Sean's point, we want to do this quickly, right? We can't wait 2-3 years. We need to get on top of this. This issue has been around for 30 years. It's going to be in front of us for the next 30 years. But we've got to find a way where we can make good investments, solid investments, so that when the Community Foundation wants to invest, we can tell you where to invest, and here's where we'll get a good return for it. So next step, we're going to take everything we've learned here and from the other 7 meetings that Deidre was talking about. We're going to bring that to our board, and then it's up to our board about how to proceed. But hopefully we can start looking for funding opportunities to fund a plan to get the answers that everybody here needs. I hope that answers your question somewhat, Bob.
Absolutely.
So Bob, so what that means is he's going to come back to us, the 17 municipalities, and ask us to help fund it, right? So each of us funds the PDC. And what I would say is what we've seen here today, it's not just about the municipalities. And so while there's not a tip jar outside, I am very hopeful that some of the players around the table today will hopefully be able to participate in some form, with this study, because we don't yet know how much it will cost, but maybe somewhere around $500,000 is what we're targeting. So anyway, I just wanted to warn you in advance, if you get a phone call from Bob Crum, that's probably what it is.
Dr. Susan Perry, you've been incredibly patient with me as we've gone around the table, but I know you have some comments, and I really feel it's important to hear from Dr. Perry. So thank you for being here with us.
Of the neighborhoods of opportunity in each of our regions and each of our cities, because you mentioned social determinants of health and quality of life. We certainly know that families do better when they're in neighborhoods that have high quality housing, but also access to good schools, transportation, and jobs. And so we need the tax credit program and the state QAP to really incentivize, instead of building affordable housing in places where has a certain demographic already, but in those neighborhoods of opportunity. So if we could really look at where those exist and then incentivize how we develop those in each of our cities, that would be great.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you.
Todd and Brian, as we continue working our way around the table, I didn't want to leave you out.
The only thing I wanted to add that Rick mentioned from the military perspective is that Rick and I recently participated in a strategy to action plan from Secretary Crenshaw's office. And just to add some perspective, we went around to every one of the military installations in the region, and to a person, every one of the installation commanders listed affordable housing and childcare as one of their top priorities. So it is very prevalent within the military.
Brian Souls from Chesapeake. So just to reinforce what John Koenig indicated earlier, and that is quality housing for all. So if we do nothing else as we embark on this assessment and the PDC's coming work plan, should there be enough support for it, that we at least establish or dilute, if not eliminate, that stigma of affordable housing, and it's quality housing for all is the term. And Chesapeake Thrives, which is a working group that we use to kind of help inform this process, and that includes not only city departments but nonprofits and faith-based partners as well, and to address the housing continuum in Chesapeake and hopefully in part the region, that's the term we use is quality housing for all. And you can further qualify that to what kind of, what type of quality or, how high of a quality. But definitely getting away from the affordable housing piece for sure is what we would support. So thank you.
Councilmember Long?
One thing I think we do need to look at when we talk about the assessment is what tools are maybe being used outside of the state that we could bring into the state, that if we could create some more change, and also look at underutilized tools that we already have existing here in the state. One thing, thinking about Richmond area, they have this model community land trust, Megawalker Community Land Trust, which enables a person to be able to buy into a house without paying for the land. So it's 30% reduction on that cost. So we talk about cost, we talk about philanthropy, and we talk about subsidy. That's a model that we could bring to this area to address some of the affordable issues. So I think when we're talking about the assessment, look at it, models that we're not utilizing here in this region, and we can actually bring some more affordable housing to the workforce.
I think that's such an excellent point that we're going to have to learn what's worked, right? And how we borrow those best practices, it will be a key part of the assessment. Mayor, before I ask you or any other of our commission members to make any comments, as Greg mentioned, our next step is to take this forward to our Hampton Roads Planning District Commission Board. That's going to be October the 19th. It's going to be at 12:30 in this room. And that's where our team will be presenting to the commission our proposal to move forward with this regional housing assessment. Mayor, anything you wanted to add as part of the conversation?
Oh, yeah, but just in closing and thanks, I got to ask Greg, is your word in the dictionary anywhere? If it is, it's probably close to irregardless, right? Okay. But listen, when I take a look at this group, and I want to thank Bob for hosting this as usual with his community efforts. I take a look at this group, and the word that comes to my head is gravitas. This is the key ingredients of the people, the mix, the blend, with the synergy and energy to actually take this problem that's been talked about for decades to some form of conclusion and resolution in the positive. So I think on behalf of, everyone involved, we want to thank you for your time and your efforts and say that we continue working together and be like Larry the Cable Guy. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Deidre, any closing comments or perspectives based on what you heard today?
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you all again. I love that we're having this conversation and have been having this conversation over the past year now, because as you all know, as a housing professional, I've been doing this work for years. And so to hear our city officials and the key players around the room really talking about this and trying to tackle this on a regional level is encouraging. And I just look forward to the future. And again, thank you.
Very good. Greg, any closing comments from you? We do. It's not lost on us. 2 hours of your time is very valuable. This might not be an easy road, but it's the right road that we've got to move forward and we've got to address. And, we've solved, many of you have solved a lot of problems in this room. This is going to have to be one of the next ones that we could address at a regional level. And, if we work together, we can get there. So thank you all so much. And this is just the beginning. We look forward to continuing engagement and having you part of this journey as we move forward. So thank you all. Please be safe travels, everyone.